My guest today is Mark Tinderholt. Mark, how are you today?
Better than I deserve. Nice to be here.
You deserve all the goodness. What are you talking about?
Yeah, I guess so, maybe.
I hope you enjoyed Code Mash as much as I did last week, and I hope
Well, it was more of a workference. You know what?
Oh, sounds like
how
you.
do you do that? So I was hanging out in the hallways, working on my laptop, taking meetings, doing stuff like being as productive as I could. But in the after hours, it was really fun connecting with people like yourselves and other conference goers and people that just don't get to see every day. So it's very nice.
I do the same thing. In fact, I equate it to going to the tailgate, but not going to the game. It's sort of like you're tailgating the conference.
Yeah, kind of. Yeah.
Now, speaking of your work, what exactly is it that you do here?
The Bobs, yeah. So I work in Azure Core Engineering, and my team focuses on kind of cross-cutting platform improvements, largely below ARM these days. So that's
Below ARM. What do you mean?
yeah. So the ARM control plane that sits atop Azure that all of our customers use whether it's through the Azure portal or through client tools. Below that, that's where all the magic happens in terms of running the Azure platform. So some of our biggest customers are actually above ARM Azure services like Cosmos DB, for example, stuff like that. But Azure Core is primarily the core resource providers, CRP, NRP, and SRP. So that's kind of what we do here.
That sounds like a good topic for a future show. But today I want to talk about your open source project, which I have open right here in this tab, and it's called GitHub AT-AT or AT-AT.
Yeah.
Tell me.
Yeah, I got corrected at my at my talk at Code Mash, and I don't know what's canon. Maybe George Lucas could chime in on this.
Definitely
I
gotta get George on my show.
Yeah, definitely not Bob Iger, but we'll see. But yeah, the GitHub AT-AT or the GitHub AT-AT is a very opinionated Terraform module and actually module library that I've been developing to kind of help people accelerate their journey to cloud operations and streamline cloud operations. So unlike just a infrastructure as code template that you just shoot out there into the cloud, the GitHub AT-AT is intended to help people start on the right foot by providing that infrastructure as code template, but also to have all of that machinery, no pun intended, in place such that they can operate that environment using infrastructure as code long term. So that's the idea behind it.
Okay, so this is for folks that you've got a project, an enterprise project, you want to deploy it over and over again, you want to set up some kind of continuous integration, continuous deployment, and you would use tools like Terraform to do that traditionally, something like that. You create your own YAML files, create your own pipelines or GitHub Actions or something. This is serves the same purpose as that, correct?
Yeah, precisely. And the idea is, like infrastructure as code solves that problem of like the ClickOps, in the Azure portal. What the GitHub AT-AT or what AT-AT modules in general are trying to solve is the ClickOps for setting up all that operational environment, like setting up a Git flow and a GitOps environment using whatever infrastructure as code tools you're using. I just happen to be using Terraform, but then also using Terraform to Terraform. So that's the kind of the what do they call it? Self recursion or internal recursion that's happening there. Yeah.
Okay. So if I can paraphrase that, it's something like Terraform will automate the deployment process, the CI/CD process, and but creating those Terraform artifacts. I think Terraform uses YAML files and a few other things. You're going to use your tool to automate that process, the process of creating the Terraform artifacts.
Correct. Well, the correct? Terraform artifact, like whatever artifacts that are needed.
Doesn't have to be Terraform. It could be
Yeah.
Azure DevOps stuff or GitHub Actions, or I don't know. There's a whole
Yeah.
ecosystem of options.
Yeah. So the most basic, deployment that the AT-AT does is what I call the starter app. And that basically drops a Terraform, like it creates a GitHub repository.
Yeah.
It creates a source code folder in there with Terraform code, which is in TF files. That's Terraform HCL files. And then it creates a bunch of YAML files that are GitHub Actions, right?
Mm.
And then it goes out and talks to Entra ID, sets up the federated identity credentials so that when you run those GitHub Actions, it can go talk to your Azure environment, all that stuff. So that's what it does.
So you say it creates that. Does it do that in response to a command line tool, or how does that work?
I mean, you use it like you would any Terraform module. Like, so you can go pull the GitHub AT-AT Terraform module from the repo and just run Terraform apply on your local machine. And then as long as you're connected to GitHub and connected to Azure, it'll go forth and make it so as it said.
Oh, well, you got a Star Trek and a Star Wars reference already in this one. I like it a lot.
No, the lad.
I'm going to try to work Doctor Who into this at some point.
I have not gotten into Doctor Who. But,
all right. So you mentioned that you need to have access to GitHub. You need to have access to Azure. Is there anything else you need to have access in order to get started?
You need access to Entra ID as well, because it sets up the federated identity credentials in Entra, which grants GitHub, grants access to that identity to be used from a GitHub Actions workflow. So, yeah, and ultimately what it's doing, it's just using Terraform the way Terraform's intended, but in a non-conventional way. Because when people think of Terraform, they think of like Bicep, they think of ARM, they think of CloudFormation, and that's like provisioning VMs or provisioning stuff into the cloud.
Yeah.
But Terraform itself is a tool that can talk to any control plane and can automate any control plane. And so there's a ton of different providers out there. And so what the GitHub AT-AT is, it's just using those providers. It's using a GitHub provider to go automate the things that need to be created on GitHub. It uses the Entra ID provider to go automate the things on Entra. And then, of course, it uses the Azure provider to go automate the things on Azure. That's all it's doing.
Okay. So you are using Terraform to do the magic that GitHub AT-AT does, but
Yep.
the control plane itself doesn't have to be Terraform. It could be it could be Bicep. It could be anything.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
How does that work? Are there command line arguments? Are there configuration files that you set up? How do you get that kind of flexibility?
Well, the Terraform module itself, you can shoot. There's a number of them right now. I have the starter app, which just sets up a basic Azure Terraform environment, and you run Terraform apply, it spits out a repo with Terraform code in it, GitHub Actions, ready to go right off the bat. If you go to that repo and trigger an apply, it'll provision your environment. There's other modules that are variants that will stand up different use cases, like the Azure Functions extension. So if you use that module, you can just run Terraform apply. It'll set up a repo to run all your Azure Function stuff. I've just recently added 2 new extensions. One is for a Jekyll-based static website. So if you want to set up a blog or something like that, you just use that module and it stamps out that fully operational environment. And now that's a completely different way of like deploying code, so to speak. It's how I manage my own personal blog, marktinderholt.com. And basically, I just submit a pull request in that Git repo, and then it runs a pipeline to publish the Jekyll, website out to Azure Storage. So that's what the GitHub AT-AT Jekyll module does. The last one that I just did is a virtual machine-based workload extension, which allows you to basically build a Packer image and then deploy that Packer image to a virtual machine in Azure, which I set up a Minecraft server using this module.
Cool.
Yeah, so it's very flexible and again, showing kind of the power and flexibility of this approach. I'm doing radically different things. One is a microservices architecture with Azure Functions. One is producing a static website content management workflow using Jekyll. And then a third is using, Packer to produce virtual machines and, stand up servers like Minecraft and whatever you want to stand up. So radically different release motions, all powered by the same kind of framework and foundations.
Awesome. And by the way, while you were talking, I navigated to marktinderholt.com, and holy cow, you're publishing a blog post almost every single day.
I queue them up, and so they just kind of come out. So I might go through like bursts of writing, but I just queue them up so that they get published every day. Like, it just flows.
You barely missed a day. I'm scrolling back to December, and even Christmas Day you had, but almost every day since I'm already back to a month ago.
Yeah.
Very impressive.
Whenever inspiration strikes, I write it down, and then, it's queued up to be published, and there you go.
Awesome. And I'm also looking at the GitHub page for GitHub AT-AT, and as I have all these tabs open as I go back and find it, I see that key features here. I just want to make sure we cover all those because you've explicitly listed them in the first section. Application environment repository. You mentioned that it will create, step one, it will create an application, a GitHub repository for you. And my question is, what if I already have a repository that contains my source code? Can I decide to use this tool after the fact, or is it necessary that step one is creating the repository using GitHub AT-AT?
Yeah, absolutely. You can within Terraform, there's ways to reference an existing resource. So if you already have a repo and you don't need the AT-AT to provision that repo, then all you'd need to do is just modify the way that you're using the AT-AT or AT-AT. We're gonna be confused like in terms here, but to use a data source to pull that existing repo and then pass that into the AT-AT, and it'll take care of the rest. And it doesn't care. And that's kind of the flexible nature of Terraform, is like, if you wanted to create that thing, you use the resource and it'll provision it and manage it over time. If you want to have an existing thing, you pull in that data source and reference it, and then go forth and prosper, so to speak.
Another
I don't know,
Star Trek reference.
I know, right?
There's 5 key features here. I just want to make sure I hit on all of them. Multi-environment support. Let's say if you have a dev environment, a test environment, a production environment, you want to deploy all of those separately and manage them separately, but make them consistent. It supports that.
Yep.
Terraform GitHub Actions workflows. Tell me a little about that.
Yeah, so I've implemented a Terraform Git flow process. I guess you could call it Terraform GitOps process, where if you want to manually trigger different Terraform core workflows, sometimes you want to run a plan and just see what the drift is within your environment or what change you can expect. Sometimes you want to follow that process completely. So you're going to submit a pull request. And then on that pull request, you're going to see what the plan says, and then you're going to review the plan. And then once you merge, then the apply happens to go take that, the changes that you made, in that pull request and make it so within the environment. So those GitHub actions that are built into the GitHub AT-AT implement kind of how I see it, standard operating procedures from a Terraform standpoint and best practices standpoint. So I'm using precompiled plans. Standard Git flow process has been implemented. So if you're operating a team that's using infrastructure as code, it's already set up for you. Like you can just start adopting it and working this way.
All right. Number 4 is optional, backend isolation. What do you mean by that?
Well, Terraform uses its own backend to store Terraform state. So on Azure, when using Terraform in Azure, that typically entails like an Azure storage account. And state can store sensitive values, right? So it's a good practice to isolate your state and treat state as kind of a privileged piece of infrastructure, such that you want to have your production and your non-production environments isolated. So You don't have like sensitive data accessible by people that shouldn't have access to it. And so that backend isolation is just something that the GitHub AT-AT is aware of and makes it easy for you to implement, or not if you're just trying to kick the tires and get something simple set up. Like you don't, it's very much oriented towards, choose your own adventure. Like you can go as deep as you want, or you can keep it like simple and easy if you're just like messing around by yourself.
Got it. And speaking of making it more complicated, multi-subscription support is the last of the key feature. If I want to deploy, I'm guessing this is if you want the production in one subscription and your dev and your test environments in different subscription. Is that the idea?
Correct. And that goes to the same, like choose your own level, choose your own adventure kind of thing. Um, a lot when you set up a multi-subscription environment, you want to have that isolation between the environments. A lot of it, there's a lot more to it than just like this subscription ID, that subscription ID. You gotta broker the right RBAC permissions for the identity in that subscription. So that's part of what the GitHub AT-AT does for you is all that plumbing to make sure that you're using an identity that only has the necessary privileges within the necessary environment in order to enact change within that environment. So that kind of has that built-in best practices from an Azure standpoint of making sure that when I deploy to a dev environment, it's to a dev subscription. That dev subscription might have a different security profile, different RBAC boundary configuration than my production environment or my production subscription. Different people probably have either long-lived or break glass access to the prod environment versus dev, which might be more wild west kind of environment, right?
Okay. And I'm looking at this GitHub repository for your project, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes. You said it is an open source project. But I see that you're the only contributor. Are you open to having other people contribute to this?
Yeah, absolutely. It's I've had some folks that have used it on the Azure Terraform or Discord that have submitted some feature suggestions, but it's something that I've been iterating on pretty rapidly recently. So
Okay.
Definitely open to pull requests for sure.
Is there anything we haven't covered that you feel people need to know about this?
I mean, just yeah. I mean, I would probably say go check out. In addition to the source code repository, you can go to registry.terraform.io. I'll drop a link to that as well, and that kind of shows how somebody might go reference this module or actually the submodules within it, and start using it. So it's if you've used Terraform before, then you're probably familiar with this website, but it's kind of the Terraform registry is kind of like the NuGet or pip, kind of
A package manager for Terraform.
Yeah, where people get Terraform modules. So
Okay. How much familiarity with Terraform do you need in order to be effective with this tool?
Pretty basic, but I think once GitHub AT-AT like provisions that repo, you're going to need to understand how to operate with software development practices, right? You're going to need to, because the intent is for you to follow those software development practices. So you're going to need to know Git, and you're going to need to be able to follow a Git flow process, create a feature branch, submit a pull request, so it's really oriented towards teams that want to embrace Git flow and a GitOps model with Terraform on Azure. So if you want to learn how to do that, I think it's great. If you're just a lone wolf, this is probably not for you, right? You're probably just running Terraform locally or something like that,
Got it. All right, Mark. Hey, I've learned a lot here. This is an area I was unfamiliar with this project until you pointed it out to me, and I've been poking around through it. It looks really cool. I can't wait to try it.
Yeah, I write a lot about the GitHub AT-AT on my blog. So usually I drop release notes out there. where I'm probably doing a better job of that. I probably need to update the documentation on the GitHub Markdown files, but yeah, I've been trying to document as I add new features to my blog. Like, so if you follow my blog or follow me on Medium, then I'm sure you'll see, or follow the Azure Terraformer page on LinkedIn. I'm sure you'll see updates for the GitHub AT-AT, and maybe it's long lost cousin, the Azure DevOps AT-AT, which I haven't published in a while. But that thing does exist, and it basically does the same thing for Azure DevOps pipelines. But the GitHub AT-AT is kind of where I've been focused on recently. But I have had people reach out and be like, you should do the same thing. Bring all this goodness you've added to the GitHub AT-AT back to the Azure DevOps one, because that's what they use, and that's their reality. So
that is cool. That's when you remind them that it is in fact an open source project, and
yeah,
pull requests are part of that ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Mark, thanks so much, and stay warm.
Yeah, thanks a lot, David. Cheers. Join the Azure Terraformer Discord and join friends as we explore infrastructure as code, DevOps, and other cloud technology.